Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. We have over 100 participants registered. Very happy to open this webinar from the Inequality Matters webinar series of the OECD Champion Mayors Initiative. My name is Aziza Akmouche. I'm heading the division at the OECD that deals with cities, urban policies, and sustainable development. And with my colleagues, Sena Sebedzi, who's coordinating the Champion Mayors Initiative, Kate Brooks, who's managing our Champion Mayors platform, and Laura Valdez, who's analyst in the team. We're very delighted to kick off this first webinar of 2020. A bit of background maybe before introducing our guest speakers today, so that you know where this fits in what the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development does. The Champion Mayors is a global coalition of about 60 mayors spread around the world who have put really the fight on inequalities at the very center of their administration agenda. We count mayors from New York to Paris, but also from Freetown to Seoul. Some of them will be represented through their city representatives or deputy mayors in the very webinar, and we have a number of them also joining as participants. We launched this initiative about 3 years ago when really in the OECD-wide agenda of inclusive growth, we were conveying the message that inequality is not just about GDP inequality. We are taking very much a multidimensional approach to the discussions around inequality to look at all well-being dimensions and a number of cross-cutting issues, and gender is one of them that we believe are somehow exacerbating some of these inequalities, whether they relate to service delivery or access to housing, access to jobs, access to green space and environmental amenities. And the series that this webinar falls under is very much about exploring different topics that relate to inequality in cities and bringing together the latest OECD research, but also some of the very concrete examples that some of our champion cities are putting forward and fostering a sort of peer-to-peer learning among city representatives and stakeholders. Today's discussion is going to focus on gender. We are in the OECD as part of our campaign, March on Gender, paying a lot of attention to that issue. We are very much believers that all policymakers and decision makers need to put gender equality at the heart of their strategies for inclusive growth to happen. And we see a lot of innovations in different cities that we believe need to get more visibility, and I hope this webinar will be enlightening to that effect. A bit of background and some of the numbers that will help, I hope, set the scene before I introduce our lineup of speakers. What do we know? And you have all received a teaser. We are going to share the PowerPoint presentation with you now. You have received in the very description of the webinar a teaser that shares some of the facts that need to be recalled. The first one is that while it is true that women have made great strides in politics, they're still very underrepresented in almost every level of public life, especially in the executive branch of governments. In OECD countries, for example, we are talking about the club of advanced and industrialized economies, we know that only women actually hold less than a third of the seats in national legislatures. One of the big challenges we've been emphasizing is that we are lacking global data that would reflect somehow this assessment at the subnational level, and that would dive more specifically on women in local elected offices. We know from estimates that just 20% of councillors and 5% of mayors worldwide are women. We have recently, as part of a major piece of work at the OECD to localize the sustainable development goals and to measure the distance of cities and regions to many SDGs including SDG 5, that is dedicated to gender equality. We have produced some new data, and what you can see on the screen is a sample of the data that we have retrieved to see, for example, the percentage of women who are mayors, where you can see a huge disparity between countries such as Korea, where there is none as far as 2018 and 19 data are concerned, all the way through countries such as Sweden, where slightly less than a third of mayors are actually females, even if in all cases, you can see that we are lagging much behind what we could call the end value in terms of the SDG 5 overall objective and universal goal. One of the positive observations we've made, which is that within the Champion Mayors Initiative for Inclusive Growth of the OECD, we have 20% of our membership, so 11 out of the 59 mayors who are actually women, female mayors, and we're very happy, as I said earlier, to have some of those cities' representatives in the webinar. If you go to the private sector, numbers are actually not much more reassuring. And we know that only a third of all managers are actually women, that in 2016, women held only 4.8% of CEO positions. You have countries like France, where there is not a single female CEO in all the CAC 40 largest companies. And the gap actually does not end there, because full-time female workers earn 15% less than their counterparts across the OECD. We know at the current pace that it will take over 200 years, 9 generations to achieve gender equality, and that these gender gaps are actually building over a woman's life, with the global gender pension gap, for example, ranging between 30 and 40%. So this is very timely as a discussion following the International Women's Day to look at gender equality not only as a basic human right, but also as a driver for economic development and growth. And as an organization that is primarily focused on driving economic development and growth, we are very much insisting that there cannot be robust, lasting, sustainable, and inclusive growth if there is no gender equality at the core of public policies. And that women left aside are estimated to cost the global economy close to $6 trillion US. That is basically 7.5% of the GDP. It's about economic growth for sure, but as I was saying earlier, it's not only about GDP. It's really important to see how this is affecting negatively society as a whole, not only economically, but also in terms of aspirations, in terms of opportunities, in terms of outcomes. And I hope this webinar will be providing some very concrete evidence of how different mayors and their city staff administration have been leading the way and leading by example in addressing that issue. So I'm very happy to introduce our panelists today, and I thank them a lot for their time and for agreeing to share some of their experiences. Here are the rules of the game. They will each have about 10 minutes to make their presentations. You can see the PowerPoints online. For everybody's background, all the information is going to be shared with you. You will have access to the PowerPoints after the webinar, and you can basically get in touch with them and inquire further. They will be notified by our chat moderator when they have 2 minutes left. I count on their discipline so that we can actually finish on time. And we will have, after this round of presentations, a window to welcome questions from all of you. Meanwhile, you can use the chat function if you wish, as you go hearing the presentations, to flag some questions. If they're directed to one of the speakers in particular, or one of the city representatives in particular, please say so. And after all the presentations, we will basically scan through some of them and collect your views as responses from the panelist side. A bit of housekeeping arrangement. We have colleagues here in the room that are helping with the technicalities. If you face any technical issue, please contact the chat moderator. By default, none of the participants can speak. You can only intervene and participate via the chat function, which should be working fine. And our 3 speakers will have the opportunity, when they're unmuted, to step in and participate in the debate after their presentation. So with no further ado, I will introduce the speakers as they take the floor. You have the slide on the screen that gives you their background, so no need to repeat that, except that we are very grateful for their long-standing commitment to the gender equality cause and for their availability today. I will start with Gotzone Sagardui, who is the first deputy mayor of Bilbao. Bilbao has been a very active city in this field, and who is actually going to share with us as a board member of different public companies in the past, president of the Ethics Commission, but now responsible for the coordination of the city council, some of her key messages in relation to this issue. Gotzone, thank you very much for your time. You have 10 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Very nice to meet you. Really pleased we are here. I am here together with Nekane Alonso. She's our Councillor for Equality, and we are going to try to join this time with you together, the both of us. I could say that in Bilbao, there are 2 dates which make quite a big difference. We have been thinking and talking about equality between women and men for many years, but it was in 1998 when really as City Hall, we gave a qualitative big step, I would say, in our fight, or at least in our goal for looking for this equality. And it was when it was created the Municipal Women's Affairs Service. Why? Because first of all, it was a way of making it visible in the government of the city. You know that we believe those things that usually we see, no? That's something. And even if we have been working in those affairs, there was no way of trying to locate it inside the government as part of the government of the municipality. That was very important also because it gave us the chance of launching gender equality strategies. Strategies that we have been changing every some years, trying to advance in those and trying to include also our reflection together with all those women and all those associations of women who are working for equality in our city. Even though it is true that we realized, and as years were passing, that we needed something else. It's very hard to say, but when things are not mandatory, some people don't seem to take them as serious. So we saw that we needed something else, and that else was in the year 2018 when we passed the Municipal Ordinance for Equality between Men and Women. Why was it so important? Because of the legislative nature. Now it wasn't a kind of, I want to join that, I really trust that, I really believe on that. It was a thing that it has to be done, and it has to be taken into account in all the political debates of the city. Second, because the communicative and educational nature. We didn't want it only to be a mandatory legislation, we also wanted it to be a way of communicating the citizens of Bilbao, which were the political priorities in matter of equality in our city, and then their mainstreaming nature. As I told you, all the city staff have to work before launching that municipal ordinance, and not only inside the city hall, but also with all the different, which in Bilbao are quite a few, associations of women working for gender equality. If we go a little bit further, and I will thank you very much to go into the next. Thank you very much. That was fine. Very nice. In that, which are the main areas that we are working on gender mainstreaming? Well, we had very clear that it was not, first, it wasn't only a thing of women, it was a transversal thing, and it wasn't only a work of the Councillor of Equality, which was a main one, but not only hers. It had to be a political work. What does it mean? It means that the decisions and the steps shouldn't be only in the councillors' affairs in gender equality, but in all the different councillors that were working, those things that everybody is looking for a town hall. I mean, when we are talking about urbanism, do we have to take into account gender equality? Of course, it makes a difference. When we are talking about rates, when we are talking about budgets, that's why we have chosen two main procedures that have been a result of this previous legislation we have been talking about. One of them is budget with a gender focus. Nowadays, we can say when the Bilbao City Hall is elaborating its budgets, its annual budgets, we take very much into account the gender equality impact in those budgets. As a result, you can see in the screen that our total budget in the city of Bilbao has gotten around 576,000 million euros, and we have consolidated a gender budget that is more than half of it. It's not a one-day's work. It has been hard, and from year to year, we have been improving that amount. It has also been a very everyday's work when we have having had to all the services thinking in a way, in a new way of building their proposals of budget. Why all this? Because we can understand that every day we have so many things to do that it's difficult to add a new one. And this is not a thing of adding, this is a thing of starting with. This is a principle, and we shouldn't forget that. Sorry. And there is another second one for us has been very important. Equality clauses in tendering. We think this is quite an innovative one because at least in our country, in the Basque country, public administration is one of the main, one of the main clients for many providers. And we think that we can show, and we should show, that also it counts for private companies when they are trying to implement equal or gender policies. We think that we can't do everything in terms of gender equality, but we can help a lot to others to realize how important it is. And tendering is one of the main subjects in which public administration, at least in the Basque country and in the city of Bilbao, can contribute. That's why in the year 2019, we approved the equality clauses in tendering. We now are going in our first year, and after that, we will be just evaluating if they are being properly implemented or not. You were also asking us how we were doing all this and how we were trying to make it in a different way. Because when talking about gender equality and feminist, it's not only talking about things and results, it's also about ways of doing things. I think you agree with me, no, Nehane? It's not only that we women try to, you know, to have mandatory results that have been to be proved. No, it's also that we want things to be doing in a different way. That's why for us, the creation of any of the measures that we are talking about is so important. And we have to talk in terms of participation, and we have to take also much into account how to involve the women of our territory, how we have to prioritize those political issues that are more important for them than others. No, we have been talking and we are showing you two main of our best practices, and I am going to mention especially the third one. No, we have a very nice project with women over the age of 60 years in trying to detect those cases of violence, victims of violence, gender violence. Why? Because nowadays we are very focused on young people, on prevention, that's very good, but we think that we can also learn a lot about those women that now being or the 60s have thought for many years that what they were receiving, the treatment they were receiving from the husband, from the families, was something normal, was something that had to happen. No, and I can think also, I believe also that that can help us to prevent for the future. So as you can see, we try to take into account every age of the women, different ages among the women of our city, so that we are working for plans for the future. It's not only what's happening, but also what happened, so that we will be able to prevent what will be happening. And if you go into the next slide, I would like to mention, which is for us a very important program. And this program is especially important for two questions. One of them, because it is among different administrations, in this case, between the Vizcaya Provincial Country and the town hall of Bilbao, and also with the private sector. We are working with private initiatives, with firms, so that we can promote a new way of working, and we can all of us together think in terms of how gender equality affects not only to the private life of every person, but also to the laboral life of all of us. We think and we really believe that there is a way of using our time that, if we agree that it's so important to conceal, it's for everybody, not only for the women, and that there are measures that thinking together can be implemented in the private firms, not only in the public ones, to make that real and to make things much better, not only for women, I will insist on that, but for all of us. It will help us to manage better conciliation for professional, family, and personal lives. And with that, we will all win, not only the women who are involved, not only the families of those women, but the society as its whole. I think that we have to talk in terms of justice, not only of equality. And as I think that I am on my tongue, we will continue with a dialogue.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor Gotzone Sagardui from Bilbao, and also to your colleague Nekane Alonso, Vice Mayor in charge of equality, for sharing those thoughts. I think the point you're making about finding a nice balance between the stick and the carrot regulation, but also soft measures that can be conducive to that behavioral change, are extremely interesting. And the examples you've provided about budget and tendering and planning, and also the intergenerational aspect of it and the shared responsibility, are indeed very, very strong points. Thank you for that. I'm sure this has triggered a lot of attention. We'll come back to you with potential questions at the end. I will now transition to our next speaker, and I would like to thank Councillor Helen Godwin for joining us. Basically, as an introduction, and you have the full position on the slide, Helen is the Cabinet Member for Women, Children, and Young People of the City of Bristol. We're delighted to have you, and the leadership of your mayor, I have to say, on many of the inequality aspects we're looking at in this team has been really outstanding. Thank you for being with us. You have 10 minutes.
Introduction. For Bristol, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. For Bristol, the key vehicle for our approach into how we want to govern is the one city approach. So as you'll see on the slide at the moment, our One City approach is intended to outlive a term of a political administration. It's intended to bring together a plan for our city for the next 30 to 40 years. And that means that we're bringing together public, private, business partners, voluntary sector to come together and think about how we make Bristol a fair, healthy and sustainable city. So by its nature, that's a more inclusive way of governance than a traditional political model. We've got a number of women that advise us through various work streams that potentially would not have access to that sort of city governance without the One City partnership and the One City plan. So we're constantly working out how we reach new partnerships and how we bring diversity into that decision making. The structure of the One City approach means that we have twice a year a sort of summit where people come together and talk about what our priorities are for the next year for the city. And very excitedly and very interestingly, actually, for us, we had two issues that were chosen by a group of around 250 city leaders last year, which actually sat with me in my sort of women's portfolio. One of those was Period Friendly Bristol, which you'll see on the next slide. Which is a city-wide collaboration, really, between businesses, so large corporate, engineering, legal firms, schools, churches, charities, lots of different organisations, museums, coming together to look at the fact that too many women were encountering period poverty, meaning that they just simply could not afford to access period products. And there's a dual issue of period stigma and period dignity that we also wanted to tackle. So by using the One City approach, we were able to reach out to city partners to find a solution. And the solution was formed over the course of last year and launched at the very end of last year as a charity, Period Friendly Bristol. And what that means is that if you come to Bristol or you live in Bristol, you will have access to period products through your community centre, through our museums, our sports centres, our leisure centres, and that is all facilitated by other Bristolians, so other people that live in Bristol who have donated products. So we've got this wonderful circular economy that is powered by a web application which was put together over the course of a weekend and some extra time by wonderful Bristol techies who came together at a hackathon and gave their time to develop this. And that project just simply couldn't have happened without that One City approach to governance. We're also tackling at the minute affordable childcare in Bristol, and that's another really big aim for us to think about how we can make childcare work for everybody. So we're talking about people from different economic backgrounds, women who want to return into work, women who want to work flexibly, and that's something that we're working on again as a whole city. The leadership in Bristol looks different, I would argue, to some of our other cities in the UK. I'll just skip back to our Sustainable Development Goals, sorry, which I should have mentioned earlier, which is sort of our conduit really with the One City plan. So we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, and Period Friendly Bristol very much sits with gender equality, which is Goal 5. And I know there's a real focus this year through the UN on Goal 5. So that's really, allowing us to focus and reach out to other cities and talk about the work that we're doing and helping to push that gender equality forward. Apologies, moving back to leadership. So Bristol, through our Women's Commission in Bristol, has organised a 50-50 campaign for a long time to try and see 50-50 representation, which I'm proud to say we pretty much have in my group, the Labour group, in Bristol City Council. We have a huge proportion of our current cabinet is women. So we've always had a majority women cabinet for the last 4 years. And we've also increased our number of councillors, as you'll see, from 23% to 43%. I think I'm the first cabinet member for women in the UK, which I'm very proud of, and that's a big responsibility to try and move forward the women agenda there. We've also looked internally in terms of the council and Bristol City Council and how we work, and we are really concentrating on trying to reduce our gender gap, our gender pay gap. At the moment, it's most prominent in the sort of lower paid jobs, and we really need to tackle that and not necessarily always focus on the senior end. We have also funded the Women in Business Charter, or part funded the Women in Business Charter, which is signed by a huge number of organisations in Bristol, all focused on trying to bring gender equality into the workplace. But for me, there's a bigger piece here, which is about how we innovate. If we have women who have voices in power, then we need to innovate and we need to make change. So in Bristol, we're focused on creating jobs and creating an environment of aspiration for all people in the city. We are bringing big employers to the city. We've got big building projects happening. And what we want to do is ensure that we've got an inclusive growth economy that can function and work in those new jobs. So you'll see on the screen now, there's a number of projects. We've got the Lawrence Hill Listing Project, which is a funded project, which means that we have been speaking to local women who are just on the edge of a huge development of corporates and housing. And we've been talking to them to understand how they can interact and thrive in that economy. We've just launched the Women's Work Lab, which is another collaboration where we are working with women who have been raising children and maybe didn't reach levels of training and education before having children, and we're trying to facilitate them into employment. So that's a collaboration between two social entrepreneurs, the council and business in Bristol, and that's going to train a whole new group of women into the workforce. Similarly, with our Hurma community stepping up, which is working specifically with our Somali community in Bristol to empower women really to come and be part of the economy and to keep growing. And we've recently also declared that Bristol is a living wage city, which means that we're working towards all our employers providing the workforce with a real living wage. And we know this affects women more than men. And the reason we want to do all of this work is that, for me, we need to move to a city that has an infrastructure and the design and the planning of the city that works for everyone. And that means it works for women, it works for children, it works for older people. And we need to somehow bridge that gap between looking at services for women and families into looking at a physical environment that also works to keep people active, healthy, moving and able to be safe in their environment. So by these kind of inclusive growth projects, we can then bring those women into the economy, into those environments, and have their expertise into how we design and make our city work for the future. So for us, it's a really exciting time to start bringing all of that together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Helen Godwin, for this very insightful experience that you've shared as a cabinet member for women, children and young people of the city of Bristol. I think you made a very good point about the need to cut across electoral cycles and the fact that this is really a long-term commitment that needs to benefit from some sort of continuity from one administration to another, because the magnitude of the challenge can definitely definitely not be fixed within a very short-term period. And I think you gave a lot of examples from your lab all the way through your community stepping up that show how all types of innovation, from social to digital to even public sector types of innovation, should be put at the service of inclusive growth and gender equality. So thank you very much for that and for stressing really the growth and economic dimension that is behind and can benefit from gender-friendly policies. I will now turn to our third speaker, and I'm very delighted to welcome Jacqueline Ebanks, who is the Executive Director of the Commission on Gender Equity of New York City. Jacqueline, welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you all today. I wanted to start by pointing out that 2020 for us in New York City and in the United States, but let me focus my remarks on the city, is a really important year as far as women equality, gender equity is concerned. One, in the United States, 2020 is 100 years since women secured the right to vote. But also in New York City, it is 45 years since we launched our first commission on the status of women, which occurred in 1975. And that is the predecessor organization of our newly established the Commission on Gender Equity, which Mayor Bill de Blasio created in 2015. If we could go to the next slide. One of the things that we think is essential for our commission to work and to have sustainable impact is that we need to have both executive vision and legislative authority, which anchors our work. And so when the mayor created by executive order the Commission on Gender Equity, he stated that this historic new Commission on Gender Equity will help us use every tool we have to create a truly equal city for all New Yorkers. And as I assumed this role in 2017, I must say that it is impossible for me to do my work without such a vision as articulated by the mayor. Executive leadership is so essential if we ought to move this work forward and if we ought to achieve equity. That vision becomes embedded in the executive order, which he created, which authorized us to work across all levels of government and all agencies, and that was a powerful tool as well. But the advocates went even further and requested that the commission be made permanent, and that happened in 2016. And so the big shift for us is that for 45 years or for 40 years, the commission was a temporary advisory commission. Now, from 2016 on, we're embedded in the city charter and we're a permanent body. That addresses one level of sustainability for the city of New York. We could go to the next slide. I'll tell you a bit about the commission and its role. We have a 32-member permanent advisory commission. 26 members are appointed by the mayor. 5 members are appointed by the Speaker of the City Council, and we have 1 ex officio member who is the chair and commissioner of the New York City and Human Rights. And really what's so important there, you see the executive branch represented in the mayoral appointees, you see the legislative branch represented in the appointments made by the Speaker of the City Council, and all of this is intertwined into our human rights efforts through the work of the Commission on Human Rights. Really think it speaks to the intersectionality of all levels of government and our commitment to moving this holistically. The commission is required to meet once every 4 months, and we are required to have 1 meeting open to the public, which in New York City is a kind of, challenging task given how many we are. We study issues. We study issues on what barriers there are to equity. We study issues that increase opportunity to gender equity. We advise and recommend to both the mayor and the city council, and we're required to report annually. And so every year we publish an annual report, and it's due April of the following year for review. Next slide, please. So in order to be effective, we determined we needed a plan, and our mayor is term limited. Our mayors are term limited, 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, And so having joined the administration in 2017, I only had one term of this mayor's administration. And so we developed a plan focused on 2018 through 2021. And we have 3 areas of focus, which through our law, we identified that these were the areas. And again, I want to emphasize here the holistic nature of our work. We're looking at economic mobility and opportunity. We're looking at health and reproductive justice, and we look at safety. In our strategic plan, we laid out 3 guiding principles. One, that gender is diverse, and that for us, we're looking at these issues and these focus areas as they impact girls, women, transgender, gender non-conforming, and gender non-binary New Yorkers. The second principle is that we use an intersectional lens, that no one person enters a room solely with one identity, but our identities are a mixture of gender, ability, age, ethnicity/race, faith, gender expression, immigrant status, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. And so we create a discipline among our team as how do we, when we shape policy and when we influence policy and when we study the issues that create barriers to equity and create opportunities to equity, that we're looking at this from a multidimensional lens and an intersectional lens. And the last principle, which is key to our work, is that the city leads by example. Every city government has 2 roles, at least. One, we are employers, and we therefore need to have gender equitable policies and practices as we deal with our employees. How do we model that? And secondly, we're the governing body, and so therefore, how do we promulgate these gender equitable policies and practices? Those are 3 principles which we try to adhere to. And then, could you just go back once more? I'm sorry. Our actions. In order to do our work, we have 4 sets of actions that we can leverage. One is the policy and legislative arm. 2 is collaboration, interagency collaboration and cross-sector collaboration. We clearly can leverage research and analysis. And last but by no means least, to shift culture, we have to educate the public, we have to engage the public and learn from the public as much as we inform the public. So those 4 actions are we deploy in any effort that we undertake. One word about our city, we have 70 city agencies. And so one of the things we recognize is that because of the mayor's articulation and commitment to equity and making New York City the fairest big city in our nation and hopefully in the world, it means that in every city agency, there is at least one equity initiative through myriad lens that are underway. And so we determined as the commission that what is essential is that we become a hub for this work. And so we asked our commissioners to appoint senior level agency representatives. And with this body, it will help us develop an integrated and a sustainable approach to achieving gender equity in New York City. I'm very proud to say that we have over 100 members on this commission, on this partnership group. And they are working, we've been together since November 2018, and we have been working in 3 areas of focus. Communications is one thing the group said was essential, that we have to be jargon-free, crystal clear, inclusive in how we communicate this work, both internally and externally. They really were talking about also, how do you manage such a large infrastructure? What are the structures, what are the strategies that we're going to deploy? And also, what are the tools and resources? So the group's been working together. We are now, by June this year, will produce a set of an action plan, which will then guide our work. And the center, the Commission on Gender Equity, is emerging as a center of learning, where we hopefully can collect best practices and we can be a sort of technical assistance group to the rest of the city agencies as they integrate gender equity in their work.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline Ebanks, Executive Director of the Commission on Gender Equality of New York City, for stressing how important the leading by example and top-level commitment and leadership is for trickling down actions within the city administration, but broader in terms of its citizens' outreach. I have to say, within the OECD, we have experienced very much the same with the Secretary General Angel Gurria and the Chief of Staff Gabriela Ramos putting at the core of the organization gender equality and diversity with initiatives such as the Gender Initiative or the Inclusive Growth Initiatives. It makes absolutely a huge difference when on the top we are convinced and driving and leading by example. So thank you for this and showing how your governance structure is actually conducive to that change. We are on time, doing well, which makes me remind you that please ask your questions via the chat. So we go on collecting them, and we will have the last 10 minutes actually to ask some of them to our different speakers before we close the webinar. And it's now my pleasure to turn to my colleague, David Alabiski. David and I work in the same directorate at the OECD, this Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. David is an economist who is working extensively on issues of entrepreneurship and leading our flagship publication, Missing Entrepreneurs. He's been working a lot on these issues of women entrepreneurs, and we have invited David not only for the gender balance of the panel, which is a good thing, that it's not only women talking about gender issues, but also to share some of the data and messages that have come out of that work in 5 minutes. David, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It was fascinating listening to some of the activities and actions happening in the various cities. That is, of course, very much of interest to us because at the Center for Entrepreneurship, we are very much interested in both national policies, but also the subnational policies at regional and city level. Now, clearly, you would probably guess that a lot of our work is focused on entrepreneurship policy. And that is indeed the case. Now, gender equality has been a long-standing issue that we've been looking at here. And we fed into many corporate initiatives and supported many governments around our membership. A big milestone for us was in 2013 when the OECD Council issued a gender equality recommendation that covered education, employment, and entrepreneurship. This is quite powerful for us because this is the ministerial level, the countries who are basically calling on the governments to take action to address barriers to gender equality in these areas. So I want to start today by just giving you a quick overview of what entrepreneurship looks like at the national level in OECD countries with a gender lens. And so this is a figure, chart that shows the proportion of the population who own a new business, which would be a business less than 3.5 years old. So if you see, there's a large variation across countries, but on average, when we look at the OECD level, women are about 2/3 as likely to own a business, a new business, as men. And you can look at various different metrics, but the story is quite similar. Women are about 70% as likely as men to be employers. Now, we heard some data at the very beginning about the gender gap and what would happen if we closed the gender gap. And there have been some estimates that if we close this gender gap in entrepreneurship, we could raise global GDP by about 2%. So there are very strong economic arguments for increasing policy attention in this area. Now, I need to pause briefly because when we're talking about women's entrepreneurship, we are, of course, talking about averages. Women are, of course, there are many very successful women entrepreneurs, but on average, women tend to operate different businesses than men. They tend to operate in different sectors. They are often smaller. And on average, women face greater barriers to business creation in the areas of skills, finance, and networks. And so at the CFE, we've been working with governments to develop policy advice and to support them in identifying these barriers and designing programs and policies to overcome these barriers. Now, I've put on the slide a few of the recent publications where you can go for more information. These contain both data and policy discussion, analysis, and recommendations. Now, cities are, of course, very important in this picture because a lot of the programs are delivered at the city level. Now, the green book on the slide is called The Missing Entrepreneurs 2019. This is the latest flagship book in this area of inclusive entrepreneurship. And it looks at growth-oriented entrepreneurship and digital entrepreneurship and the potential for digital entrepreneurship to close some of these gaps. And these chapters really highlight the role of cities. A lot of the programs, as I said, are delivered in cities, and there's a wide variety of approaches. There's a lot of activity in Ireland, for example. Dublin has a lot of growth-oriented programs that are really focused on peer learning and matching women entrepreneurs with successful role model women entrepreneurs. But of course, there's a lot of activity across many countries. So at the Center for Entrepreneurship, we are carry on with this work. We're hoping to do more in the area of working with cities, better entrepreneurship tool, which is on the screen, and working with different stakeholders to identify policy gaps and measures to address them. And finally, the CFE has put a big push behind women's entrepreneurship work. We've launched what's called the Center for Entrepreneurship Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. And this looks at boosting all of this work, notably in the areas of access to finance. So we're working with countries to disaggregate all of our financial data by gender. But of course, there's a lot of work in other areas as well, notably the social economy, tech sectors, business development services, and the need to differentiate between men and women-owned businesses, and of course, our usual policy work and case studies. And I thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, David, for sharing these insights. And as a follow-up, maybe we can send to the participants all the links to the background reading. We produce 700 reports at the OECD every year, and those are very important ones. Please do have a look. So we have received a few questions. It's my pleasure now to open the floor. And actually, I've selected some to strike a balance between the three speakers. The good piece of news is that there is at least a question for each of you. Maybe I would like to start with Helen from Bristol. Helen, we have a few questions for you. Actually, two are questions for clarifications, pretty easy. If you can say a bit more about this communication channel that you mentioned, how does it work? Who do you listen to? Is it open to all? There is a question on the period dignity program to know whether reusable clothes, menstrual pads are part of it or not. Those are easy to address. And then maybe what are some of the ways the city is studying and measuring its progress towards gender equality? You've shared some very interesting indicators about the trend in terms of closing the gender gap, increasing female representation. If you can give a bit of feedback on how more systematic assessment is done. So maybe we start with Helen, and then I will have a question for Bilbao, and then one for New York City. Helen, please, you have the floor. If you can, please keep your response to 2 minutes. I know it's not easy, 2 minutes max, and then we will happily connect you with those asking the questions for follow-up.
No problem. Okay, so the communication channel, I'm not quite sure what that's referring to in terms of if it's how we speak with women throughout the city. Then we have a Women's Commission in Bristol, which has different representatives that come and meet every 3 months, and we have constant communication with those women who feed into them policy, especially they've been really strong on affordable childcare and things like that. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but if not, I can happily take it offline. In terms of the period-friendly Bristol programme and reusable products, the donation and distribution network is mainly around disposable products at the moment, because we appreciate that for some reusable products, there needs to be some education about how they're used and things like that. So we've actually got, alongside the donation and distribution network, an education program which is available to all Bristol schools, which has a really big piece of work in there around sustainability and reusable products. So our intention is that when we're working with younger people, we'll be introducing the idea of reusable products, and then as they mature and grow a bit older, then the whole sort of economy will change into reusable. But again, I'm happy to take any other questions offline. In terms of how we're measuring the impact of our work, so a lot of the programs that I spoke about have got their own evaluations alongside them, but more systemically through the One City approach, we are building really strong relationships with our local universities, and that enables us to call on them in terms of research and just building out sort of monitoring and evaluation in some of our work that we're doing to see what kind of impact we're having on the city. And I think because of the One City approach, we're probably able to draw down on that more than we would have been. But as I say, each of the programs, so Stepping Up, works closely with the other university that's in Bristol. But also I think because of our focus on the SDGs, we're able to really kind of pull in a lot of that work into SDG 5, and that enables us to do a bit more evaluation as well. I hope that answers it.
It does. Thank you very much, Helen. I will now turn to Bilbao, Gotzone, and Nekane. 2 questions for you. The first one, if you can give a bit of information about the special interior renovation and refurbishment plan of the city. How does that include gender, if it does? A question from a participant from Italy, and then another one which is more related to how you address particular groups within your gender-based initiative. Regarding the involvement of women in policy design, are you taking into consideration the opinions of the young women in their early 20s? What about teenagers? You have mentioned engaging women over 60 and having this intergenerational approach. How active are these senior women also in your daily contribution to gender equality? And if please, you can keep your response to 2 minutes as well.
Hello, thank you. Hello, thank you once again. It's acting now. Hello, once again, thank you for those questions. There are 2 minutes for 2 minutes, but I'll do my best, I promise. First of all, I will start from the end. I would say that senior women are nowadays the most active women in all our gender equality initiatives. Probably because they have been the ones who have suffered more for many years, and a lot of them in silence. We have many generational and even inter-sectorial groups working on all the initiatives of the gender equality, and especially of the equality councillor works. What we do is we have a continuous relation, and we even have a commission, and a specific commission within it, where all the associations which are working in the city of Bilbao in terms of gender equality can take part. They don't have any other special requirement but to be working on those politics as the main affairs for their associations, and to be located in Bilbao. They don't even have to be including only women participation. They can be mixed associations. That's one. There is a second one which is very important, and it's the work that we are doing with young people, because we work very close. The Councillor of Equality is on gender equality or equality between women and men, is working very closely with the Councillor for Youth and Sports. Why? Because that's the only way that when creating the programs that we are offering for those young people, then is when we have to think how to implement or how to approach the gender equality issues. When talking about our internal regeneration, that's why it was so important when we were able to approve a law for the town hall. It seems very difficult to say in the year 2020, but even now you have to have a kind of mandatory tool that can implement in all the different aspects of any politics, the gender equality issues. I think that was one of the biggest goals of our town hall in the year 2018. I'm afraid to say that for years in the future, I only looked at as the very practical tool in order to get our next successes.
Thank you very much, Gotzone, Vice Mayor of Bilbao. And I have one question left for Jacqueline from New York City. Jacqueline, which kind of advice can you give to cities looking to better incorporate a gender equality lens in their administration? I think, Jacqueline, the point that you mentioned about your commissions and interagency partnerships was attracting a lot of attention. If you had a tip or two for someone that wishes to raise that profile in a given city, where should he or she start?
I am hoping that the executive of that city, mayor or head of that city, has really articulated this vision as well. Quite frankly, I would not be as successful or be able to move the needle without the mayor's expressed vision. And I even am consistently asked by agency representatives, can he make it even more explicit? And so we're looking at what the nature of that ought to be. That rhetoric sometimes isn't enough because of the numerous challenges that I think our city agencies have to deal with. The other thing, however, is to create this opportunity where the body that's responsible for gender equity actually can equip agencies to move more rapidly to change. And what that is evolving to be for the Commission is that we really need to start developing some case studies, developing tools that could make the efforts more turnkey in their city agencies. We have actually been asking agencies to send us the information they already have. If they have gender equity statements, do they have assessment tools? And then our commission, our staff will be reviewing those and beginning to share that. We're actually beginning to explore, can we develop an intranet that's only available to city workers, specifically targeting gender equity? We're not sure where that will go, but that's something that we see emerging. It's really important that the Commission on Gender Equity for New York City becomes the in-house expert on this work. We'll continue to promulgate legislation through our work, but we really need to be a guide for city agencies to create shifts. And I also see that being instrumental in our relationships with the for-profit sector.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and thank you very much to all the speakers and my colleague David for joining us today and for the passion and energy you've put in your presentations. I hope this has re-energized many of us and given you some of the tips, I would say, that come from some of the best practices in different champion cities to drive gender equality. Let's keep the conversation going over social media and our website. You can do so by following us on @OECD_local or #championmayors. I know there's been a lot going on in parallel to our conversations today to promote and disseminate some of the quotes. The webinar has been recorded. It will be put available on the OECD website, and we invite you please to share this with your colleagues. If you are a city with an initiative that relates to inclusive growth that you'd like to showcase, please get in touch with the team. Join us for future webinar. I'm very thankful to my dream team here, Senna, Kate, Laura. Thank you very much for organizing this fantastic webinar. Thank you also to the team that has helped with the support and logistics, Antonio, Lucy, Alex, many others, and I hope this was enlightening for many of you. Thank you very much again for your interventions, and with this, I now close the webinar and look forward to the next activities within the Champion Mayors Initiative. Thank you all.
Thank you. Hope to see you back soon.